Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about preparing for an important proxy and disclosure season. It's something we look at annually, and joining me is my usual guest for this discussion, Ron Schneider, who's the Director of Corporate Governance Services for DFIN Solutions. Welcome back, Ron.
Thank you, TK. Great to be with you.
So when I think about ESG and diversity and inclusion and human capital and heightened say on pay sensitivity, more and more investors are voting against directors for all of those issues plus more. So the real question is communication becomes important. So how are proxies planning to ramp up to meet the disclosure demand of the shareholders?
Well, sure, TK. And what's happened over the last couple of years is while the traditional proxy focus was primarily on governance and boards as well as executive compensation, ESG, a very broad topic, including human capital management and its subsidiary topics, has risen to, for many investors, equal stature with the governance and the compensation. Investors, particularly the large, long index, they call themselves permanent investors, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street Global, continue to be interested in company impact on the climate, but they're also interested in company resilience to climate impact and change. And the current situation, which we'll discuss in a bit, is amplifying that. So continuing what we talked about last year, the proxy increasingly being a board-centric document from about the board and its processes, that's continuing. So the big new focus is on board oversight of ESG, whatever happens to be most relevant material to a particular company. And so investors are generally looking for board diversity, including their skills and qualifications. They're looking for disclosure about identified ESG risks and opportunities. They are trying to understand. So part of the challenge is investors aren't in the boardroom, as you know, and that's for good reason. Yet they do recognize the importance that boards have in this process, and so they tend to be limited to voting on external factors that they can judge, like director attendance and things like that. But what companies are doing to kind of meet the investors in the middle is providing more transparency about some critical board processes, like board oversight of risk, including ESG risks and opportunities. Who does what? How does the process work? Board evaluations. How do they work generally? Not the results, but how do they work? Director recruitment and evaluation. Where are the future skill sets and new directors coming from, and how does that work? And what's been the result of that process? So we're just seeing more transparency about board-related processes, and including the current board, its mix of skills and qualifications, and the processes that will lead to that board renewing itself and having the emerging skills and qualifications that current and future events demand.
So, Ron, will we see in this coming proxy companies addressing the COVID-19 risk and related disclosures?
Absolutely. We're already seeing it. Now, recognize the guide is primarily, this is the 8th edition, primarily based on 2020 proxies. The majority of calendar year-end proxies filed in March and April when COVID was intensifying. People were recognizing its impact, but the full impact was not yet fully known by certainly most people. Now, we're not out of it yet, but I think COVID can be looked at and reported on two ways. One, as an event, and it certainly will be in terms of its impact on year-end, 2020 results and company's financial condition and adaptation of strategy and resilience. It's also a lens to the pre-existing focus on environmental, social, and governance issues, including board oversight of these additional issues, the company's business model and strategies, and their resilience to long-term systemic changes. COVID, being a like an exclamation point on that. Employee health and safety, that's been of interest for a while. Well, working from home is primarily a safety issue. How does that work? How will return to the workplace work? Supply chains and their resilience. And I think what's also emerging, and we're seeing much more disclosure about it, and not just the words, but more detailed discussions of corporate culture. In other words, are these attention to these ESG factors? Are they just tactical, or are they also values held by the company, the management, and the board? So we're seeing more high level discussion both on strategy and culture.
So you mentioned the guide, and for those that don't know, DFIN Solutions is just published its 8th edition of its 2020 guide to effective proxies. And Ron, I wanted to thank you for sending that to me electronically this year versus physically, because the guide is now over 500 pages, and it is really a blessing to anybody that has to research this stuff, because you guys have done a great job. I love that I'm able to go to the table of contents and click on the area that I'm concerned about without wading through the whole thing. I get to that section, and then you've done a great job on identifying the creative companies and what they've done to improve their proxies and their communication tool to the shareholders. So I would think that most people, and certainly the corporate secretaries in our audience who seem to get very engaged in proxies, would find that as a very valuable tool. And again, the electronic method of that I find very easy to use.
Well, thank you, TK. I mean, this is the 8th edition, and I was reflecting back on the first edition, which I actually found a hard copy, and it was 29 pages and had about 20 companies highlighted that were doing some interesting things back then. Since then, yes, it's expanded for 2 reasons. It's client-driven. They're asking us to show examples of discussing a greater array of topics. Most of these are driven by conversations they're having with their investors. We also stay in touch with investors through the Council of Institutional Investors and others. We hear what's on their minds. We try to look a bit forward to what they're going to be looking for. In the early days, the challenge was finding some good examples worth highlighting. Now the challenge is limiting that as we look at a greater array of topics, with ESG adding a third dimension as indicated. So now one of the challenges is how to show a range of approaches to particular topics, but without, who do you leave out? Because someone else could compile the same guide and come up with different examples. There are so many. There's not a right or wrong. There's just a lot of good ways that work for different companies. So we try to make the guide useful. It is available in hard copy for those that would like it. We do not charge for it. Companies tell us it's a big time saver. They always looked at other proxies online or otherwise to get an idea where the bar was headed and how different companies, peers and otherwise, are treating certain topics. We just made it a little more organized. The online version, like proxies, have grown in length too. And most larger investors will say, look, to me, it's not a reading document. If I look at it, I treat it like a reference document. So I'm looking for certain topics. So same with the guide. So the table of contents, you click on it, you go to the section you feel you're interested in. There may be a couple of related sections on adjacent topics. You go to it, you flip through, there might be 10 or 15 examples if you're interested in the context of that, like what preceded and followed it in that company's proxy, where is it located? You can click on an arrow above the image, and that will open up the full document to give you an idea for the context of that one page that we may have highlighted. And then in a new feature, there's a words active disclosure at the bottom of many of them, and that indicates that one of our disclosure management tools was utilized, which just emphasizes the fact that proxies are rarely a single person or legal only drafted document. There's input from the board, HR, legal, finance, sustainability, risk, and other groups. So it's a team effort. So we keep evolving it based on investor interest and based on client requests.
Well, I want to reemphasize that it's free. Okay, that it's a heck of a resource tool for people to have access to, and I certainly encourage it. So, Ron, where can people get a copy of this now that we've hopefully encouraged them to get this resource tool?
Okay, if anyone sees my electronic background, DFIN is our company's ticker symbol, Donnelly Financial. So it is at DFIN Solutions, one word, DFINsolutions.com/insights, or just DFINsolutions.com, and then click on Insights. You'll find the full guide. And there's also something called the mini guide, which has some emerging topics like employee health and safety, corporate culture, and others. So they're all right there.
Well, Ron, I want to thank you for your annual visit to cover, what's changing with the proxies. I think that next year and then the year after that, I think we're going to see a lot of disclosures coming down the pike. And I think your 500 will probably turn into 600 pages. But hats off to you guys for making this available to people. I know I've used it. It's a good tool. And I appreciate you giving us an update on what's happening in the proxy world. So thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you, TK.
So that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week and take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.